Cats are certainly very popular, at least on the internet. The little furry murder machines that domesticated humans a couple thousand years ago. It should come as no surprise that they appear everywhere in fiction. From ancient times, people worshipped them as gods, spirits, ascribing them with supernatural qualities, much like wolves or foxes. Only out of all of these beasts, the cats were always the closest to us. So in modern fantasy, cats and cat people appear almost everywhere. Can we categorize all the cat people we see in fiction in any coherent way, like we did to say elves or dwarves or orcs? Surely there aren't high cats and dark cats in fantasy, are there? But if there aren't, can we divide them into any biological or cultural subtypes? After a thorough analysis of most big examples I could easily find, I think the best way to divide them up is by how much cat there is in the cat person. And there will be cat shit in this video, so just bear with me for a moment, alright? As you may know by now, I don't talk a lot about JRPGs and anime and stuff like that. Mostly because I don't really play or watch them, so I don't feel qualified to talk about the topic. I don't have anything against them, there is just only so much time in the day, and I have some types of games I already know I like. I do think I missed some big things in previous videos because of that, and I would definitely miss something huge if I omitted this topic here. And that topic is kemonomimi, or as some people would say, cat girls. In Japanese, the term means literally animal ears, and it describes something you see a lot in Eastern fantasy, and it's not just cats. Various animal people there will often look mostly human, but have just like random assorted animal bits, most famously ears, but also noses, tails, sometimes claws on their otherwise human hands, horns where it makes sense. Do satyrs qualify as kemonomimi? Do ranai? I'll leave that to you. Cats are one of the most popular animals to have a kemonomimi version, leading to this type of character often being called cat girls in the West. Because you might notice, they will often be girls. And sometimes you will have males of the same species and they will look much more animalistic. The history of this stems from mythological figures like Bakeneko or Nekomata, these shape-shifting cat spirits who can turn into people to trick them. Sometimes in those legends you would also have the shapeshifters like Tanuki or Kitsune have a tail, some bit of their animal form they can't shapeshift and always betrays them. So this aesthetic, or of a mostly human-looking figure with animal bits, emerged in Japan, and is far less common in Western fantasy. With my admittedly limited knowledge of Eastern fantasy, my most familiar example is the Mithra or miqo'te of Final Fantasy. They're called one name or the other depending on specific games or genres, but they're largely identical in appearance and attitudes. I don't know why they didn't just use the same name Square Enix already made up themselves, but I'll let the Final Fantasy fans weigh in on that. And regarding the whole male cat people thing, to the best of my knowledge, for years we wouldn't even see any male Mithras, and they weren't playable because of how important the whole cat-girl aspect is to the concept. Final Fantasy XIV did finally make the males playable, but it took a long time. The other major example I can think of is, strangely enough, not Eastern fantasy, actually, and it's kind of a half example, because I am talking about the Vastaya. They are definitely an example of the general kemonomimi concept, because a lot of the females at least look like human women with random animal bits. It's only half an example because the cat ones are actually kind of rare, and the most famous one is Ari, who's a fox rather than a cat. There was that one lady in Arcane, but while the Vastaya fulfill the general trend, and they definitely can be cats, you don't see a lot of those on Runeterra. My search for more examples brought me a lot of random anime and video games I never heard of, so I have no clue which of these are important or relevant, so have a go at it in the comments. I just did have to bring up the whole general category. I think we will find more examples when we get into anthro-cats, races that are vaguely humanoid but look mostly like cats. I don't think their appearance really needs a lot of explanation. In most Western fantasy, when you want a humanoid animal race, this is the general template we go for. We just make the animal stand up on two legs, and maybe give it thumbs, maybe elongate the body to be more human-like. And this is what we come up with. One of the most popular examples here would be the tabaxi. The tabaxi exist as two different things, in the Forgotten Realms at least. Originally, the name applied to a human culture from the remote continent of Katashaka that did have cat ties, but it has since then morphed into a race of full-on cat people. The other tabaxi still exist, you just don't hear about them as often. I have seen some people make the tabaxi PCs look more like the cat girls, which, it's D&D, you make your character look like whatever you want, even if you want to make a minotaur with a human face. Looking at you, Sam Regal. Canonically, though, they are either humans or cat people. People will probably want me to bring up the Char from Guild Wars, and sure, they look kind of feline, but they also have horns, and their general culture, I'll get back to that in a moment, and build are very different from what you usually associate with cat people. They end up looking more like the beast from the Beauty and the Beast, who's not supposed to be one specific animal. So I put the Char in the same box as the Vastaya, not really cat people. What is interesting is that you would not infrequently see the males of the cat girls look like these cat people. Perhaps it does stem from the Japanese cultural connection that gave us the cat girls, where their myths spoke a lot about shape-shifting animals tricking men into sleeping with them, but it wasn't as common for the male shapeshifters. Because of a very old cultural trend in Japan. Look, I'm not that kind of nerd, I don't know Japan as much as some people online do, so feel free to expand on that, or share your doctorate thesis about the Komonomimi and why they are like that. Be my guest. Though they are probably not very well known, Warcraft does have its cat people, and they are called Zaberons. They appear for the first time and last time in Warlords of Draenor, which might be a big part of why they are not more popular. And they appear as these quote-unquote primitive creatures that raid other races and have shamans and druids, and just about the only one that talked to us was Leorage, who was supposedly made smarter by finding an Apexis crystal. I always say that if WoW made them playable somehow, they would be an instant hit. Just find the Spires of Arak that broke off from main universe Draenor, and now there's a bunch of Zaberons there. Or when the Magar escaped, they brought a few with them. Look, if we can have Void Elves be playable, these should be enough. Strangely enough, where science fiction often tries to avoid having too many races that look like Earth animals, cat people are one of the most popular ones that slip through. Among them you can see the Caitians from Star Trek, or Cathar from Star Wars, or kind of arguably the Na'vi from Avatar. I don't really know why cats are so often an exception to this, except cats are cool. What I need to get into here is two types of cultures that you see in those two variants, but aren't necessarily tied to either one. Because when we look at cat people and imagine, what kind of culture would cats have, we apparently come up with two answers most often. As with Mithra or miqo'te examples, we basically look at giant cats, like lions, and extrapolate from that. Miqo'te have two major subcultures, a patriarchal and a matriarchal one. Patriarchal ones, called the Seekers of the Sun, have males command these prides, while the matriarchal Keepers of the Moon have the women hunting and men staying at home. Those are two different cultures, but they both stem from the same thing. What if lions, but human? They are two different cultural ideas of what we imagine about lions or lionesses. So their race kind of extrapolates from there. Final Fantasy isn't the only setting that does this. The other major examples I can think of being Wemix, I will get back to them in a moment, or the very animalistic Saberons, or the more noble idea of a lion in the Leonin of Magic the Gathering. The other major logic for cat people culture is, where do giant cats live? Africa or Central America. So what kind of culture do they have? African or Central American? I have spoken before about fantasy culture counterparts, and I'm not a huge fan of doing that, but I would make a big mistake to omit mentioning how often that happens. The tabaxi were literally originally conceived as someone's generic idea of jungle culture. You will also find a lot of these in Golarion, including in a number of their faux Egyptian countries, because Pathfinder does a lot of fantasy counterpart cultures, and the cats frequently get pegged with Egyptian because of the common conception that ancient Egyptians worshipped cats. I mean, they did, but they also worshipped crocodiles and hippos and jackals and the beetles that roll around the round pieces of. They worshipped a lot of different animals and not just cats, but we just remember the cats. Something that proved to be surprisingly common was this kind of a cat centaur build. Dungeons & Dragons have a monster called the Lamias, which has been depicted as this sort of cat centaur since the first edition, for reasons unknown to me since the mythical Lamias were more serpentine. But while those are definitely closer to what you'd first think hearing cat centaur, it's not what I really meant. Now, in D&D you first see them in the Wemix. They are a race that was relatively popular back in 2nd edition, but has really disappeared since. And they look even more bizarre than the regular centaurs, because their lower body looks like a cat, but their upper body also looks like a cat. And you would think that would result in just a cat, but it doesn't, because where the lower cat ends, in place of its neck is a humanoid cat torso from the previous category in this video. And you end up with 1.5 cat in a single cat, which is the highest amount of cat in a cat person we had yet. Wherever Wemix appeared, they ended up with these vaguely African undertones, mixed with a little bit of a wad of lions, but human. They are a very peculiar bit of early D&D. But that's not even the only one, because World of Warcraft introduced their own cat centaurs in the Tolvir. They were meant to explain where the Obsidian Destroyers came from Warcraft 3, but they really kind of spun off from that. Warcraft now has 2 forgotten races of cat people. And if you look at the Tolvir sculptures around their zone of Uldum, you can guess they're probably supposed to be sphinxes, hence also a very Egyptian culture, but they still end up with this weird 1.5 cat build. I wish Uldum as a zone actually delved more into them instead of the bad Indiana Jones pastiche, but I think I talked about this before, so there is no point to dwell on that. I know this is just 2 big examples, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. I have to finally bring up a race I've been avoiding so far because they give us a fairly unique example of a cat person that I struggle to find anywhere else. If we divide these cat people by how much cat there is, how can we get even more cat than an anthro-cat or a 1.5 cat? Because what if 1.5 cat is too much cat? What if we go just regular house cat? Enter the Alfiq. They are a specific subspecies of the Khajiit from the Elder Scrolls who, if you catch them undressed, will look indistinguishable from regular house cats. We finally get to see a lot of them in ESO, and they are just about exactly what you'd expect. They look like house cats, a lot of them behave like house cats, only they can talk and cast magic. They kind of need to have magic because they don't have thumbs. They use magic for everything, to get dressed, to prepare any food without just biting into things. And I love the Alfiqs as an idea because it's just so unique. They're not just another race of humanoid animals, but have their own unique challenges and opportunities. I love them so much that when I made the continent of Yoakan for my Warcraft reboot, I made a race called the miqo'te, who are exactly this, magical talking trickster cats. Just about the only other example I could find, unless you count an individual robot cat from Final Fantasy or a witch's familiars, is a very obscure race from 3rd edition called Tibbits, who were magical talking cats but could shapeshift into humans. And now we finally come to what I promised you in the start. The Khajiit. I was trying to avoid mentioning them before because they are kind of all of these at the same time. If you are not familiar with the Khajiit lore, there's far more to them than just the cat people you see in Skyrim. Far more to them than just, drug addicts and thieves. Turns out there are 16 different variants of the Khajiit, and those variants are based on the phases of the moons when they are born. It doesn't matter what your parents looked like. When they are born, the Khajiit are born, they'll all look like kittens, and then they grow up to become the different variants, depending on those moon phases at the time of birth. I don't know what that means for, if somebody is born premature. Do they get the moon phases from the time they were supposed to be born, or from the actual time they were born? Does their race change while they're coming out of the womb? Or is it, preconceived when they get, conceived? I don't think anyone answered these questions. Those variants of the Khajiit include cat girls, cat people on cat-like legs, really large cat people, slightly smaller cat people, talking tigers, and, as we just mentioned, talking house cats. There are a lot of unique nuances to their culture, like their very unique way of speaking that I'm sure we all heard in Skyrim. Their culture, back in Elsewhere, because that's what their home is called, Elsewhere, is a bit of a mix of various influences. We see Middle Eastern parts and Southeast Asian parts, and it looks a bit like a fantasy counterpart culture, but it mixes enough of them that it doesn't feel too repetitive. And of course, there is a lot of that esoteric Elder Scrolls lore. There are bits about Khajiit doing this moon dance, where they rise into the sky holding each other by the tail until they reach the moons. Their lore reveals the moons are allegedly not the true corpse of Lorkhan, but there is actually a third hidden black moon behind them. They are seriously one of the best bits of Elder Scrolls lore, and there is no way for me to do justice to everything about them in this single video without turning it into just the Khajiit video. Well, I think that's about it from everything I could find about various types of cat people throughout modern fantasy. There is probably a lot of examples that just didn't come up in my research, or just some random animes that a lot of people know that I never encountered because I just don't know anything about anime. The only anime I ever watched was Pokemon, so this is really not my topic, so I'm not gonna bring it up. But I will be curious about what examples you can give me. But please, make sure it's actually on topic of the video. Under the human subraces video, I had so many comments about things that were either not human or not subraces, or people who clearly didn't watch the video, didn't know what a subrace even was. I mean, it's engagement, it's good for YouTube, so what do I know? But yes, cat people. Everyone loves cat people, and they're everywhere, and I sure add them everywhere in my own creations too. Probably the only race I add more often is hamsterlings, which are my signature, but that's beside the topic. As of this writing, we already have met YouTube's thresholds for the first stage of monetization, by my accounting at least. YouTube just needs to catch up with the actual numbers. So soon, very soon, we'll have super chats and channel memberships, and maybe I can start thinking about merch. But that day is not today, so keep an eye on that, and when it comes, I hope to see you there.